Dealership lots are packed, and it's starting to look scary. Cars aren't moving. Not because people stopped shopping, because the math stopped working. Payments jumped, rates spiked, and the affordable cars became luxury payments overnight. But here's the trap. Even buyers who show up ready are getting killed at financing. Trade-ins are underwater, lenders are tightening. And every day those cars sit, dealers pay interest just to keep them breathing. New cars are stuck. Used cars are stuck. When both markets freeze at the same time, the whole system starts to crack. Here's why 2026 changes everything. The year buyers walked away. The rupture showed up quietly at first. A family would stroll into a dealership, fall in love with a perfectly normal sedan, and then freeze the moment the payment estimate landed in front of them. One father stared at the number for so long that the salesperson whispered if he was feeling lightheaded. He said he simply could not understand how a basic commuter car had turned into a monthly bill larger than his mortgage. That moment became common across the country in 2026 because the payment shock no longer applied only to luxury trucks or oversized SUVs. Even modest models were suddenly out of reach, leaving buyers emotionally overwhelmed and financially cornered. For many households, the shift did not come from reckless spending, but from the hard math of rising interest rates stacked on top of inflated sticker prices. A car that once required a comfortable commitment now demanded financial gymnastics. People who spent years imagining that they would upgrade their vehicles found themselves abandoning the idea entirely. The emotional retreat was not dramatic or loud. It was quiet and steady, a collective step back from a marketplace that no longer felt designed for ordinary people. Rising costs reshaped expectations faster than families could adjust, creating a financial tension few anticipated. What once felt like a manageable expense became a source of pressure that quietly influenced every decision, leaving buyers hesitant, uncertain, and increasingly disconnected from the market they once trusted. A different story begins to unfold when you look at the empty spaces those buyers used to fill. The vanishing foot traffic phenomenon. Something strange happened inside dealerships in 2026. Showrooms that once buzzed with weekend families, first-time buyers, and curious test drivers now sat in an eerie stillness. Sales staff leaned against desks, checking their phones, because the doors hardly opened. The question gnawing at managers across the country was simple. Where did everyone go? The answer revealed a deeper behavioral shift. People had not stopped shopping for cars. They had stopped doing it in person. Digital browsing replaced wandering the lot. Online calculators replaced early negotiations. Virtual walkthroughs replaced friendly introductions. A salesperson in Ohio described waiting 3 hours without a single visitor. He said he felt invisible, as though the entire industry had quietly moved to another dimension. Consumers were still interested in vehicles, but they no longer believed they needed the dealership to explore their options. They gathered information online, compared prices across states, and arrived at conclusions without stepping foot on the showroom tile. The dealership experience became a final formality rather than the start of the conversation, cutting sales opportunities down to a fraction of what they used to be. Foot traffic did not simply fade, it evaporated in a way that revealed shifting priorities. Customers wanted clarity, speed, and independence, and digital spaces offered those advantages effortlessly. As routines changed, the showroom experience lost its central role, becoming optional rather than essential for modern shoppers. Yet digital independence only amplified another growing obstacle buried in buyers' existing loans. If you want more breakdowns on how these shifts are reshaping prices, dealers, and your own buying power, make sure you like the video, subscribe for deeper updates, and share your thoughts so we can track how this crisis is unfolding in real time together. The negative equity black hole. A woman in Florida walked into a dealership determined to buy a reliable hybrid after her aging compact car began failing. She had researched everything, saved for months, and approached the moment with cautious optimism. Then the appraisal arrived, and the truth hit like a wave. She owed thousands more on her trade-in than the car was worth. The negative equity swallowed her purchase plan instantly. Her situation was not unusual. It was representative of a nationwide trap created by years of long-term loans and inflated pandemic-era prices. When dealers tried layering the old debt into new financing, the numbers twisted into impossibility. Monthly payments ballooned. Interest made the gap worse. The shopper, who entered with hope, often left with quiet frustration, not because the desire to buy had vanished, but because the math simply would not cooperate. The result was a market full of willing participants who found themselves locked out by their own financial history. Dealers could not overcome the arithmetic, and buyers could not justify sinking deeper into obligations with no clear return. Debt from earlier purchases followed buyers into every negotiation, reshaping conversations before they even began. Numbers that once seemed harmless grew into obstacles impossible to ignore. Each calculation reinforced the same reality. Financial gravity pulls harder when past decisions restrict the freedom to move forward. The emotional weight of these failed attempts fed into an even broader shift happening inside the minds of consumers. The fear factor. Confidence hits a 20-year low. For decades, the car market ran on. The belief that people might grumble about prices yet eventually adjust. In 2026, that assumption cracked. The myth that buyers always return met the reality of a public that no longer trusted long-term debt. Households that once embraced 5-year loans hesitated. 7-year financing, once treated as a clever convenience, now looked like a trap. The cultural attitude toward borrowing changed with surprising speed, shaped by economic anxiety that had been building for years. Careful savers, typically unaffected by market shocks, began avoiding major purchases altogether. Younger buyers, who normally fueled entry-level sales, recoiled at the idea of committing to a payment stretching nearly a decade. Families accustomed to upgrading every few years embraced long-term ownership instead, choosing repairs over replacements. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Confidence had collapsed, not because people lost interest in cars, but because they lost faith in the financial structures that surrounded them. Caution became the defining sentiment across households, reshaping how people evaluated risk. Borrowing no longer felt routine, but carried a weight tied to uncertainty. Every commitment demanded scrutiny, and the instinct to pause replaced the impulse to upgrade, altering the rhythm of the car market entirely. That fading trust sets the stage for a new problem unraveling behind the scenes, where dealerships face a different kind of crisis, one rooted not in buyer behavior, but in their own overflowing lots and mounting pressure. Overflow lots, and the clock that is running out. The warning signs appeared in the empty spaces where sold tags used to hang. By early 2026, many dealers watched their lots swell with vehicles that simply refused to move. What once felt like healthy selection turned into an oppressive wall of metal, stretching from fence to fence. Cars that should have sold within a few weeks sat, untouched for months, gathering pollen, dust, and quiet resentment from managers who understood the financial danger building beneath the surface. Floor plan interest, once a tolerable cost of doing business, turned predatory as rates rose and inventory aged. Every additional day transformed each unit from potential profit to certain loss, eroding margins long before a customer even set foot on the pavement. Some stores tried rearranging their rows, hoping a fresh layout might spark interest, but the problem was not presentation, it was time. Vehicles reaching 90 days on the lot became a concern. Vehicles crossing 120 days became a crisis. By the time certain models approached 180 days, dealers spoke openly about drowning. Every passing sunrise meant another bill coming due, another charge piling onto the balance sheet, another conversation with lenders tightening expectations. Overflow lots were no longer a sign of strong supply. They were a countdown ticking toward financial strain. Inventory overflow forced dealers to confront uncomfortable truths about shrinking demand. Vehicles lingered long beyond their intended cycles, accumulating costs with each passing day. The stillness on the lot reflected more than slow sales. It signaled a structural imbalance that traditional strategies could not solve. That pressure only grew heavier when the used side of the market collapsed into its own form of paralysis. When used cars stopped being liquid assets, dealers once depended on used cars to keep cash flowing during slow new vehicle months. But in 2026, that safety valve snapped. Used inventory lost the very quality that made it valuable: liquidity. Vehicles that normally turned in 30 days suddenly sat for triple that time, despite aggressive markdowns. The problem began with unrealistic wholesale prices baked in during the frenzy of the previous years. Cars were purchased at inflated costs, leaving no room to discount without incurring steep losses. Yet consumers, armed with more information than ever, refused to pay outdated valuations. The stagnation had a cascading effect. Dealers marked units down again and again, only to watch the days on lot number creep upward anyway. A mid-size crossover could go from a confident retail listing to a burdensome asset that drained capital with every additional inspection, battery jump, or reconditioning touch-up. This was not merely slow sales, it was an inversion of the market's physics. Vehicles that used to rescue balance sheets now threatened them. Some stores even halted buying altogether because the risk of acquiring dead weight outweighed the need for fresh inventory. Used inventory relied on rapid turnover, yet that cycle fractured as affordability weakened. Lowering prices failed to stimulate interest, revealing a deeper issue rooted in consumer fatigue. Dealers watched their most reliable profit engine stall, unable to recover momentum through familiar tactics or quick adjustments. These mounting losses set the stage for a deeper financial wound rooted in the choices dealers made during the peak of the bubble. The overpay crisis, dealers trapped by their own bids. During the feverish market of the early 20s, competition for desirable inventory became a frenzy. Dealers bid tens of thousands above typical valuations just to secure vehicles that seemed guaranteed to sell. By 2026, those decisions came home to roost. A luxury SUV sitting for over a year became the symbol of this era. Its dealership had paid far beyond its sustainable value, believing demand would stay strong. Instead, interest evaporated. The unit deteriorated from prized acquisition to financial liability. Every month added more floor plan interest. Every appraisal revealed deeper losses. Every attempt to market it reminded managers of how deeply they were trapped. This was not an isolated example. High-end sedans, performance coupes, and electric luxury models inherited the same fate. Dealers debated whether to take enormous losses immediately or bleed out slowly while waiting for the right buyer who would likely never arrive. Wholesale buyers, once eager to scoop up rare units, became hesitant as the market's downward spiral intensified. The result was a collection of vehicles that functioned more like museum pieces than merchandise, each embodying a lesson in how quickly fortunes can reverse when optimism overshadows discipline. The consequences of aggressive bidding resurfaced painfully when inflated purchases refused to sell. Optimism from past markets collided with present-day limitations, trapping dealers in long-term losses. Valuable floor space became occupied by vehicles once seen as assets, now functioning more like anchors dragging finances downward. Yet even these painful miscalculations seemed manageable compared to the financing shock that soon followed, reshaping the entire sales pipeline. The subprime pullback that choked the market. Evidence of a looming credit contraction emerged when subprime lenders began tightening approvals without warning. Approval rates that had propped up sales for years dropped sharply. Dealers accustomed to closing deals with buyers who carried imperfect credit suddenly found themselves unable to finalize transactions. The explanation arrived in industry memos outlining rising delinquencies, shrinking tolerance for risk, and a recalibration of lending models. Subprime institutions backed away from the very customers who once sustained a significant share of volume. Those buyers did not disappear, but their access to financing did. The consequences rippled immediately. Sales teams watched contracts fall apart in finance offices after lenders refused terms they once approved routinely. Managers scrambled to find alternative banks, only to encounter identical restrictions. The market had not lost interest from consumers alone. It had lost the oxygen that allowed those consumers to buy. Subprime lending had long functioned as the connective tissue between aspiration and affordability. But in 2026, that tissue tore. With credit drying up, even motivated buyers could not move forward. Financing instability reshaped the sales process in ways few anticipated. Declines that once seemed rare became routine, disrupting deals already in motion. Approved buyers turned into rejected applicants overnight, exposing the industry's dependence on credit flows that weakened just as market pressures intensified across all segments. This tightening knot of rising inventory, stagnant used vehicles, overpriced units, and vanished financing marked the beginning of a much larger structural reckoning that dealers were never prepared to face. Direct sales, the dealer's worst nightmare, arrives. For years, dealers comforted themselves with the belief that direct sales were a fringe experiment, a novelty that would never threaten the traditional showroom. That myth collapsed when buyers began embracing the idea of purchasing a vehicle with the same ease as ordering a phone. The reality became undeniable as automakers leaned into direct channels that bypassed the dealership entirely. Customers no longer needed to wander a lot or negotiate across a desk. They could configure, finance, and secure delivery without ever speaking to a salesperson. The difference in experience was stark, and consumers recognized it instantly. Evidence of the shift appeared in legislative debates across multiple states. Lawmakers who once protected franchise models discovered their constituents preferred simpler buying paths. Pressure mounted as thousands of drivers publicly argued for the right to choose how they purchased their vehicles. The shift did not happen because people disliked dealerships. It happened because a smoother alternative emerged and gained momentum with remarkable speed. Frictionless purchasing became a standard expectation rather than a luxury, leaving dealers struggling to justify their role in the transaction. That disruption set the stage for an even larger realization about how the internet itself had quietly rewritten buyer behavior from the ground up. Online retail wins. Why the lot lost the battle. The question on every dealer's mind in 2026 sounded deceptively simple. Why is nobody walking through the door? The answer revealed itself through browsing patterns rather than foot traffic. Shoppers had migrated online, not out of convenience alone, but because the digital environment granted them something the physical lot never could: full transparency. They could compare prices across regions, analyze financing offers, read verified reviews, and check historical data in minutes. The dealership no longer controlled the information. And once consumers realized that, the balance of power shifted permanently. Algorithmic financing tools made matters even more challenging. A customer could input their credit factors and instantly view personalized loan scenarios without any salesperson moderating the conversation. The sense of control proved irresistible. Meanwhile, online inventory platforms expanded far beyond a single store's selection, giving buyers access to thousands of vehicles at once. Dealers were not competing with the lot across town anymore. They were competing with the entire nation from every digital angle. This evolving digital landscape exposed a deeper weakness forming within the supply chain, where electric vehicles began piling up faster than dealers could explain. If you want to stay ahead of the next wave of changes hitting the car market, make sure you subscribe. Every update we cover helps you understand what is coming long before it reaches buyers, dealerships, or the headlines. The EV glut, inventory that dealers cannot move. The industry spent years preparing for an electric revolution, yet the moment it arrived, something unexpected happened. Electric vehicles poured into showrooms faster than consumers adopted them, creating a mismatch between production ambitions and real-world demand. The problem emerged most visibly in the back rows of dealership lots, where rows of silent electric models waited for buyers who never appeared. High expectations collided with practical hesitation as drivers worried about charging access, battery longevity, and unpredictable resale values. Enthusiasm existed, but it did not scale at the pace manufacturers planned. The cause of the glut became clearer as incentives shifted. Automakers chased regulatory targets, flooding the market with models that did not align with regional infrastructure. In areas with limited public charging, customers hesitated. Dealers tried offering steep discounts, yet the financial weight of these cars made deep cuts difficult. The result was a growing wall of inventory that eroded profits every single day. Those challenges highlighted another friction point brewing beneath the surface, one that had nothing to do with batteries or charging stations and everything to do with a new form of digital frustration: subscription features and the consumer backlash. A single example captures the tension perfectly. A driver purchased a well-equipped sedan, believing every feature listed was included in the price. Only after delivery did she discover that several functions required ongoing digital subscriptions. Heated seats, remote start, and certain safety tools sat behind monthly fees, turning ownership into a layered expense she had never agreed to. Her frustration echoed nationwide as more customers realized software-locked features were becoming standard practice rather than rare exceptions. The dealership had not deceived her directly, yet the experience felt like a betrayal of the very idea of owning a car. The backlash grew louder as drivers began sharing stories across social media. People questioned why they should pay repeatedly for hardware already installed in the vehicle. Critics argued that subscription models blurred the line between ownership and rental, eroding trust in the brands that adopted them. Dealers found themselves caught in the crossfire, forced to explain policies they did not control, while absorbing the anger of customers who felt misled by modern pricing strategies. The resentment spread so widely that industry analysts warned of lasting damage to consumer confidence. That rising sense of disillusionment connects to a broader shift that signals just how fragile the traditional automotive system has become. Automakers quietly shift away from the dealer model. Evidence of a strategic realignment began surfacing as early as 2025. Manufacturers that once celebrated expansive dealer networks started trimming allocations with unusual precision. Some regions experienced dramatic cuts, while others saw entire rooftops lose long-standing privileges. Internal reports suggested a coordinated move toward tighter control of pricing, marketing, and inventory management. The aim was not secrecy, it was efficiency. Automakers recognized that the traditional dealership structure had become a financial drag in an era that increasingly rewarded direct engagement and streamlined logistics. The trend spread as more companies experimented with controlled distribution. Reduced inventory shipments, fixed-price pilot programs, and online first reservation systems revealed the direction of travel. Dealers who once enjoyed generous volumes found themselves competing for far fewer units, often with little explanation beyond supply prioritization. These quiet adjustments carried heavy consequences. Smaller franchises faced shrinking revenue streams, while larger groups scrambled to renegotiate contracts or diversify their operations. By the time the public noticed, the shift had already embedded itself deeply within industry planning. The implications of these changes widened considerably once global competitors entered the U.S. market with force. Foreign competition reshapes the battlefield. A new chapter in automotive competition began unfolding when foreign brands, particularly those from China, accelerated their global expansion. The timeline was clear. In the early 2020s, they showcased affordable electric models at international expos. By the mid-decade, those vehicles started arriving in global markets with prices that undercut established manufacturers by astonishing margins. Their strategy combined aggressive pricing, rapid production cycles, and surprising advancements in battery technology. For American shoppers, the appeal was obvious. For domestic automakers, the threat was profound. Comparative analysis revealed why the momentum tilted so quickly. Chinese manufacturers had access to lower-cost supply chains, vertically integrated battery production, and a domestic market that pushed innovation at speed. Meanwhile, American brands were still recalibrating from supply shortages, rising wages, and years of overbuilt gas-centric infrastructure. When import waves gained traction, consumers discovered they could acquire a capable electric vehicle for significantly less than a conventional compact car. Dealers, already struggling to move existing inventory, faced a competitive landscape that no longer resembled anything familiar. That international pressure magnified a more personal crisis playing out inside the workforce itself. The human toll, jobs, training, and industry contraction. A service advisor in Texas arrived at work one morning to find an email announcing immediate restructuring. His dealership, once bustling with technicians and finance staff, had reduced its headcount overnight. He walked through the service bays that afternoon, noticing how the once steady rhythm of tools striking metal had quieted. His story echoed across the country as dealerships faced declining revenue, fewer allocations, and shifting customer expectations. The contraction did not feel abstract. It felt intimate, measured in personal losses rather than market charts. technicians who had built careers around internal combustion engines suddenly required training in electric systems, software diagnostics, and high-voltage safety. Some embraced the transition, others struggled to adapt. Sales teams accustomed to face-to-face negotiation found themselves competing with automated online processes that removed their defining role. Finance managers confronted shrinking approval volumes as lenders tightened criteria. The emotional weight of these changes extended beyond job titles. People reconsidered their futures, questioned their skills, and wondered whether the industry they had known for decades would ever resemble its former self. This human upheaval pushed observers to ask a larger, unavoidable question about what the future of buying a car would even look like. The permanent new normal, the long-term direction of the automotive market, rests on a deceptively simple inquiry. What does car ownership become when traditional dealerships no longer anchor the experience? Analysts point toward a landscape shaped by fleet subscriptions, direct delivery systems, and minimalist service hubs that focus more on software maintenance than mechanical repair. Consumers may begin paying for access rather than ownership, selecting monthly mobility packages that combine insurance, maintenance, and vehicle use into a single digital plan. The shift mirrors trends in other industries where convenience outweighs tradition. Direct delivery appears poised to dominate. Drivers could configure a vehicle online, sign a single contract, and have the unit arrive at their home without stepping onto a lot. Service hubs would replace sprawling showrooms, offering fast repairs, over-the-air updates, and battery diagnostics. Urban areas may adopt micro-fleets that rotate vehicles automatically based on demand. Rural communities might rely on mobile service teams instead of local dealerships. What emerges is not a diminished automotive world, but a reorganized one in which physical retail plays a supporting role rather than a central one. This evolving structure signals the end of an era and the beginning of a new equilibrium that redefines mobility, labor, and competition on a global scale. If you felt this market freeze firsthand, walking away from a payment, getting denied, or watching dealers slash prices, drop your story in the comments. I read them, and they help us track what's really happening in 2026. Hit like if this opened your eyes, subscribe for the next breakdown, and I'll see you in the next one.